Hi, welcome back to Kino Recaps. Today I'm going to explain a 2013 supernatural action comedy film called R.I.P.D. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The movie opens with our hero, Nick Walker, burying pieces of ancient gold in his backyard. He plants an orange tree on top of it. In the morning, Nick and his wife Julia chat about sweet nothings, and we learn Nick is in the Boston PD. They discuss the orange tree but Nick doesn't mention the gold. Nick worries that they don't have money. Julia says she has all she needs, her husband. After philosophy class, Julia goes for a jog, and Nick heads off to work. At work Nick and Bobby discuss the gold, and we learn they're dirty cops. Nick tells Bobby he's out, and that he's putting his gold in evidence. He feels guilty, and doesn't want to risk his relationship with Julia. Bobby tries to talk Nick out of it. When Bobby understands Nick won't change his mind, he pretends to agree with him. And we understand Bobby has decided to kill Nick, and that Bobby is the bad guy in this movie. Just then a colleague bursts in, and tells them they're heading out to bust a big-time meth dealer called Garza. On the way over, Nick makes fun of Bobby's St. Christopher metal charm bracelet. A bunch of cops and a SWAT team burst into Garza's warehouse, and shoot a bunch of bad guys. Nick spots Garza and chases him up to the top floor, but Garza gets away. Bobby follows Nick up to the top floor, and after some brief tough guy talk shoots him. Nick falls all the way to the ground floor, smacks his noggin on the concrete, and is dead. Nick wakes up, stands up, and sees a scene of complete mayhem frozen before him. He walks outside, and begins to realize he's dead. He looks up, and starts floating up to meet his fate. Judgment. But as Nick stares into the light, and starts to panic, he is swept sideways and comes to an abrupt halt in Proctor's office. Proctor tells Nick that being a dirty cop was bound to get him killed, and that Judgment doesn't look too good for him. Proctor tells Nick he can take his chances with Judgment, or work for the R.I.P.D., the Rest in Peace Department. When Proctor tells Nick he'd be working in Boston, Nick accepts immediately. She says the term is 100 years, and if he does a good job it will help, come Judgment Day. Nick accepts and gets an R.I.P.D. brand on his chest. Proctor explains that deados are people that have died, but remained on Earth. The R.I.P.D. catch deados, and move them on to face judgment. Deados look like regular people, until they pop, and only members of the R.I.P.D. can recognize them. Proctor explains the souls of deados rot, and they cause everything around them to rot as well. Without the R.I.P.D., Earth would be full of deados, and would be chaos. Just then, a deado in custody makes a break for it, and gets terminated by Roy. Roy's colleagues chastise him for terminating the deado, but Roy just doesn't care. Proctor and Roy have a brief exchange, and we understand they have a history. Proctor introduces Nick as his new partner, and Roy is less than happy. Roy reluctantly accepts his charge, and leads Nick out of the precinct to show him the ropes. They file into a model toilet, and are transported to an actual toilet, in a VCR repair shop in Boston. Roy explains the first step is closure, and takes Nick to his own funeral. Nick does not handle his funeral very well. When Nick sees Bobby consoling Julia, he snaps and rushes to comfort her. Julia doesn't recognize him. She freaks out, and a scuffle breaks out. Nick lunges for Bobby, but is held back. Nick finds Roy, and asks why Julia didn't recognize him. Roy explains that the R.I.P.D. look different to the living, and that they cannot reveal themselves. Roy gives Nick his R.I.P.D. ID cards. He looks like an old Chinese retiree. Roy, on the other hand, looks like a model that hit the wall some time ago. The pair leave in Roy's car. Roy explains a few things to Nick, including his love for ankles. Roy hates the idea of a partner, because he was betrayed by something they have in common. Roy takes Nick on a simple bust, to show him the ropes. It's dark when they arrive at an apartment block. Roy grabs Indian takeaway from the boot of his car, and explains it's tactical. Roy explains deados can be tracked, by following the trail of their rotting souls. In the elevator, Roy gives Nick soul killer bullets, which erase deados from the universe. Deados have to be shot in the head. The bullets don't affect the living, but do affect the R.I.P.D. When the duo arrive at the deado's apartment, Roy puts Nick in his place, before knocking. Stanley answers, and Roy tells him they suspect he might be dead. Stanley tries to play dumb. Roy pressures Stanley with his Indian takeout, while Nick pressures him with questions related to spicy dishes. It doesn't take long for Stanley to crack, and he pops. Roy says he thinks that it's the cumin that stresses the deados. Roy tells Nick to cuff Stanley. Nick is reluctant and nervous, and Stanley sees his chance to escape. Before running, Stanley grabs a milk carton from the fridge. Nick and Stanley scuffle, and end up cuffed together. Stanley rips off his own arm, and beats Nick with it before escaping. As he runs, he swallows chunks of gold from the carton. He jumps through a glass window, and free falls to land flat, on an adjacent building. Nick is shocked, when Stanley burps, peels himself off the roof, and stands up. Roy knocks Nick out of the building, and rides him down to land on Stanley. All three fall off the building, hit everything on the way down, and land in an alley. Nick is in shock, and in a lot of pain. Nick beats Stanley with his own arm, and he pukes up the gold. As Nick stares at the gold, Stanley lunges at him, and Roy erases him. Roy then begins to waffle on about Nick's job performance. Nick loses it, and throws Roy in front of a bus. Roy loses his hat, and is inconsolable. The duo return to the precinct, which is alive with activity. There has been a surge in deado numbers. Proctor is not happy, and reams Roy over the botched arrest. Nick tells Roy they should investigate the gold, but Roy is not interested. Nick manipulates Roy's pride, and he takes Nick to see his informant. Elliot initially gives Nick attitude, but after some persuasion calms down. Elliot tells Nick the gold is just rubbish, and that deados are just sentimental. Nick gives Elliot the gold, and tells him to keep his ears open. Outside, Roy is upset that Nick stole evidence and gave it to Elliot. Turns out, Roy is still upset about his hat. Just then, Elliot exits the stadium looking shady. Bobby arrives, and Elliot gives him the gold. Roy lights up. Our duo follow Bobby, and Roy is delighted that Bobby is schooling Nick left and right. They arrive at Nick's house, where Roy declares Bobby is sleeping with Nick's wife. Nick refuses to believe it. Inside, Bobby carefully checks how much Julia knows. He then tells Julia that Nick said he buried something. Meanwhile, Roy and Nick are observing through the neighbor's hedge. Julia leads Bobby outside to the orange tree. Nick panics as Bobby checks and finds the gold. Bobby says he'd hoped he was wrong. Julia is heartbroken. Roy puts his gun to Nick's head and calls him a crooked cop. Bobby tells Julia he'll take care of it. Julia decides she didn't know Nick at all and goes inside. Roy demands an explanation. Nick says they took the gold from drug dealers, and it was a victimless crime. Roy demands to know why the deados want it, but Nick doesn't know. Roy is not happy and suggests Nick go and talk to Julia again, since it went so well last time. Nick cracks and punches Roy a few times. The duo then tail Bobby to a busy station. Nick is gutted that his wife now thinks he's dirty. Roy has no sympathy at all, and tells Nick to grow up and act like a man. A deado courier arrives, and Bobby gives him the gold. The duo ambush the courier, and shuffle him into a nearby freezer, grabbing a tin of cumin on the way. They order him to talk, and hand over the gold, and threaten to pop him. The deado decides he's sick of hiding, smashes his face in the cumin, and pops into a massive deado. He easily overpowers the duo and legs it. Nick and Roy pursue, and attempt to contain the deado. Roy manages to harpoon him, but then gets dragged across city buildings in full view of the public. Chaos ensues. Nick tries to shoot the deado, but gets flattened by a projectile car. Nick fails to shoot the deado in the head, and Roy fails to contain him. The duo finally corner the deado in an elevator shaft. They manage to wrestle the gold off him, but he gets away. Roy says he's never seen a deado like that before. Back at the precinct, Proctor tears both of them a new one. They argue that this deado was different, and could not be contained. Proctor is not satisfied, and stresses they wound up on the news. Eternal Affairs communicate that they are not happy, but confirm the duo uncovered a serious problem. The gold pieces are part of an artifact, called the Staff of Jericho. The artifact returns dead people back to Earth from the afterlife. If constructed and activated, the Earth would be flooded with deados. Basically the end of the world. The artifact requires the blood of thine enemy to be activated. Roy is not happy, and has a rant. Eternal Affairs send another communication to suspend the duo, and call a hearing to have them erased the following day. Nick gets poopy pants, and leaves. He goes to meet Julia, and manages to tell her he hasn't left her. Julia is confused and scared, and runs off. Roy is there, and informs Nick he is not helping Julia, but rather haunting her. He explains the RIPD exists to help the living, that Julia needs to move on, and that Nick's life is over. Roy advises Nick to resolve his crap, overcome his weakness, and emulate Roy's inner peace. Nick snaps, and says some truly off-color shit, successfully upsetting Roy. And just when Roy is vulnerable, Nick sinks the boot. Later that night, Roy serenades Nick on the dock with a melancholy song. Nick admits that he went too far, and apologizes. Roy accepts his apology. The duo decide to stop moping and deal with the deados. Nick knows Bobby must be leading them, but never detected any soul rot from him. Roy explains certain artifacts can mask it. Nick remembers Bobby's St. Christopher medal. The duo decide to go pop Bobby. Meanwhile, Bobby walks into a cafe, and hands half a silver artifact to another deado. Bobby tells the other deado to go find some trouble, and he leaves. The next morning, Julia calls Bobby. She tells Bobby what happened at the stadium, and that she thinks it was Nick. Bobby tells her that he'll pick her up, and they can talk. As Bobby hangs up, Nick and Roy pull up outside his house. He grabs the other half of the silver artifact and puts it in his pocket. The duo get into the house, corner Bobby in the kitchen, and order him to take off the St. Christopher medal. He does, and the house immediately rots and falls apart around them. They find Bobby's stash of gold and take him in. In the car, Bobby explains how he became a deado. He got shot during a drug bust, and didn't pull through. He decided he wasn't going to hell, just because he stole from drug dealers. He declares he's not going anywhere. Back at the precinct, a number of dangerous-looking deados have been brought in. Roy searches Bobby, and confiscates the other half of the silver artifact from him. Roy books it, and the gold, into evidence. The officer notes they just booked something similar, and throws it in the same basket. The two halves come together, and time freezes. But not for the deados. The deados grab the gold from evidence, and escape the precinct through the model toilet. The deados arrive in Boston. Bobby phones his courier on the roof of the Commonwealth building, and tells him he got it all. The deados begin building the Staff of Jericho. The RIPD follow them down, and a gunfight ensues. A deado with a Gatling gun creates havoc, but the gun soon jams. Roy steps into the street for an old-fashioned shootout. Two deados move from cover, and Roy deftly dispatches them. The duo dispatch more deados, and then notice the chaos the Staff of Jericho is causing. Meanwhile, Bobby has sent a couple of deados to pick up Julia. Back in the city, the deados are securing the area around the Commonwealth building. The duo recognize it as the center of the chaos, and speed towards it. They're soon intercepted by deados. The pair evade the deados, and falling cars and debris, as nearby buildings disintegrate. With some skillful driving, they lose the deados and escape the debris. Julia arrives to find Bobby waiting for her. Bobby snorts some cumin, and pops in front of her, which understandably freaks her out. Meanwhile, a helicopter news team is reporting on the chaos. An airborne truck knocks the helicopter out of the sky, and comes to rest just above the Staff of Jericho. Below, the duo smash through the deados' defenses, and dispatch the courier to boot. Back on the roof, the deados complete the Staff of Jericho. Bobby explains to Julia that ancient artifacts often require human sacrifice. Nick and Roy reach the roof, and Bobby spears Julia. As the duo battle the deados, Julia's blood is drawn into the Staff of Jericho. The artifact is activated, and the dead begin to descend toward Earth. The duo realize they don't have much time. Nick goes for Julia, while Roy heads for the Staff of Jericho. The pair battle through the deados. Nick reaches Bobby, but runs out of ammo. The pair battle it out, man to man. Meanwhile, Roy is having trouble dismantling the artifact. Nick tries to reach Julia, but Bobby throws him back. Roy sees the truck, and gets an idea. While Bobby gives Nick a spanking, Roy lassos the truck and tries to pull it down. Meanwhile, the dead accelerate toward the Earth, and Bobby rings Nick's bell. Roy finally succeeds, flattening himself in the process. Bobby turns to look in horror, as the dead cease falling, and are drawn back up into the afterlife. Bobby looks back to see Nick's gun in his face, and is erased. Nick rushes to Julia, but is too late. Julia sees the scene freeze, and realizes she is dead. She can see Nick as he is, and the two get to see each other one last time. Nick tells her she doesn't belong there, and that she has to live her life. Julia wakes up in hospital. The doctor looks at her in silence, and we soon realize it's Proctor. Proctor tells Nick, Julia will be fine. Proctor leads Nick and Roy out of the hospital, and gives them some good news. Eternal Affairs have let Nick off with a warning. And they've added 53 years of RIPD service to Roy's sentence. Roy is not happy, and says Proctor just likes having him around. To which she smiles, and gives him his hat. Roy is shocked and delighted that Proctor found his hat for him. He is humbled, and admits he could have been a better man. Proctor billy goats Roy, and walks off. As our duo head to their car, Roy gives Nick a present. A new ID. It turns out to be a girl guide, with red hair, and a serious retainer. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. It really helps the channel out. For more videos, subscribe, and turn on notifications.